The media analysis article I chose is from the Christian Science Monitor. And I chose this article by going to the website and under the World tab, choosing one of the top articles. And of the top 3 that were obvious, I chose the Venezuelan knocks over its democracy, the region pushes back article. And this article is broken up into a few different sections. I'm just going to quickly summarize each section and then we'll get into the analysis. So Venezuela is currently in some turmoil because the president decided to dissolve the National Assembly. So now the judicial system is the legislative system, which is all overseen by the president. So it's really an authoritarian government, and going from a president-elected republic to an authoritarian government is a major shift. And the neighboring countries of Venezuela are not too keen on this. So Peru withdrew their ambassador, and the Organization of American States, which is pretty much all of these and more, wanted to push back and kick Venezuela out of their organization entirely, but couldn't because of some of the islands which aren't seen here, which are kind of like around the coast, benefited from subsidized oil shipments from the former Venezuelan president. So they were partners in trade, and some of the people in the organization didn't want to kick them out because of those trade partnerships. And also this particular section goes into how the citizens are not okay with the change. So it's the neighbors not okay and the citizens not okay. The next section talks about misplaced optimism and how this isn't just an out-of-the-blue random change of government. This is something that's been coming for a long time and that a lot of people knew may or may not eventually happen, but were hoping wouldn't happen. And I have here listed some of the reasons of why people thought it wasn't going to happen, and I just want to touch on a few of them, and that people had faith that everything would work out. They just didn't think that their country would go to this authoritarian rule. And this is not just like the citizens, this is also political leaders too. So political leaders not planning or, just relying on dialogue alone when obviously the diplomatic process is not one that this president holds in high sincerity. So, and the other aspect is that this is a very left region. There's a lot of people in this region who are more of those socialism type views where the government tends to control more aspects of the society. So when you're telling people that, oh, hey, this government is bad because they just took control of this or that, that was kind of an argument falling on deaf ears in this region. And people didn't want to side with those who were speaking out against the government because most of these people in this area are in partnerships with the Venezuelan government directly, so it would be like siding with your friend's enemy, which was obviously not okay, especially when you and your friend are of the same political view, and that political view is the moral authority in the region. So the people of the region believe in that, and it's an entirely different society than what we live in America, but it's kind of shines light on how this came to be about. The next section talks about the pushback from the surrounding areas. So the areas that I've highlighted in yellow were the ones that the article specifically noted on being openly against this new change. So I'm not saying that Peru isn't or that Ecuador isn't, because there's definitely evidence of them being not for the political change, but they haven't openly in this article expressed that they're not going to continue with favorable relations with Venezuela. And one of these big concerns is that now Venezuela is writing the book on how to go from a democratic nation to an authoritarian nation in a left-leaning way. And that is a book that many other countries in the South American area would would want to learn from. And specifically, Nicaragua is already kind of like starting to follow in their footsteps, which was, we'll touch on later, but listed here are just boom, boom, like the different steps that they took in order to make this happen. And ending in that they are now focused on gaining control and not international views, not the people of their country, like upholding their needs, because they're just focused on this, okay, this is the political climate we want to create and we're going to create it. They're not necessarily concerned with much else. The last section, the end game, is a summary within the article by the author and talks about moving forward from the point where we're at now, and how diplomatic change is kind of, according to the author, no longer an option because it's too little too late. Because Nicaragua is already following Venezuelan steps, and depending on the outcome of the presidential election of Ecuador, we could be seeing more leftist, less democratic, more authoritarian rule possibly in this region. So the article just kind of talks about how South America is changing and will continue to change in this way. So for my source analysis, I surprisingly found the Christian Science Monitor pretty unbiased. They were very objective and included a lot of different perspectives from American universities to international sources to people within their own government and people, citizens of that country. So it was a lot of different views, and they organized it well, and the writing style was very easy to follow. One of the things that surprised me was that there was not any religious bias, because from a Christian Science Monitor, I expected there to be a Christian lens coming on this, but I didn't find that. And when I went to their About section of their website, I found this quote. It is produced for anyone who cares about the progress of the human endeavor around the world and seeks news reported with compassion, intelligence, and essentially constructive lens. For my content analysis, through the lens of presentism and culture, I found that, not that I agree with this, but Venezuela is definitely doing what is common in present day political systems, and that is it's focusing on its own state and how it wants to run its own state and not worrying about external international views. So the Venezuelan government should be left alone because we are in an era of nationalistic rebuilding, especially in the Americas. We have U.S. with Trump, who's trying to focus on us, and even when in the case of Mexico, directly not worrying about their opinions much at all. And then in Colombia, where they just got over their civil war, so they have a lot of turmoil that they're now building back up from. And in Brazil, with their economic situation going down and the presidential impeachment, they're now coming back from that. So Venezuela is just another example of a country who is currently in economic and political turmoil and trying to, put something together. And maybe even though we don't, as a democratic nation, we don't support the way that they're going about this, it is a present trend. Through the lens of culture, it's kind of hard for us as Americans to see how this could have happened because of so many of their rights that were degraded before then and how they got to the current situation that they're in. But we have to remember that they're much so in a leftist region, so they're much more in that socialistic type of mindset where your government controls more things. So the idea of the government's encroaching on different personal freedoms was overlooked, and in general, they're hungry, they're malnourished, and they're lacking medical supplies. So they're worried about those direct fears and those basic needs, as opposed to all the slight movements of the president. So looking from a cultural perspective, I can definitely understand why this came about. In relation to the textbook, I was hoping to use a later unit, but the first unit really had more to do with this article, in that the unraveling and how to respond to a disordered world article specifically from the textbook related to this article, because this article is about how Venezuela is in chaos and disorder. So how is this fitting into the world? And from the textbook, we learned that disorder comes from the rejection of current rules and arrangements, which the current president obviously rejected the National Assembly and the arrangements that they had agreed upon in order to make himself the ultimate power. And we also learned that globalization leads to these fuzzy borders where people and possibly threats can go in and out of countries. And also the textbook goes into the 3 trends that are leading to global chaos and how the great powers being diffused into a bunch of different powers relates to this article in that Brazil is one of the BRICS powers, and Venezuela being the northwest border to Brazil directly affect each other, and the concerns for Venezuela's borders directly affects Brazil. And so the U.S. mistakes have accumulated globally, and our reliability and judgment are globally scrutinized now, so that the respect for the American economic and political model are diminished. So with the leftists gaining in that region and our democratic model kind of, under scrutiny in a global concern way, these kind of come together in a way where Venezuela can openly say that, hey, we are this socialist region under authoritarian rule, and that's okay, because in the global world, now the democratic power is kind of, trending downward. So going back to our class themes, this goes back into global power shifts and the emerging BRICS, especially Brazil, global variability, and how the precedents for authority and favor have been in the South American and the Asian world. So it's there. It's very much so prolific. So, and how the U.S. reputation decline also directly affects the political systems around us, because they don't need to be our same political system or our same economic system if we're not doing great. And from types of government, because we talked about the presidential republic and the authoritarian government. In conclusion, the media source didn't have any obvious bias or political slant, more precisely, and the unraveling of Venezuela could possibly be a general shift for South America, more towards a not only leftist but non-democratic political system. And this political shift will continue to be center stage in our news outlets, not specifically with Venezuela, but in general, the trends against democratic political systems. And the specific article will shape history in the northern coast of South America. I believe that Brazil will grow as a power and come to bear the chaos which may or may not spill out of this country, and the political relationship between the U.S. and Mexico will be mirrored in the Brazil-Venezuela relationship as they grow over time. Here are my references. Thank you.